Something I wanted to talk about was the change in attitude with regards to black and white Jewish relations. And I don't say black and Jewish because this is really a misnomer born of a heavy concentration of Ashkenazi Jews coming to America and viewing themselves as a sort of monolithic embodiment of Jewishness. And this is fine, but it's not accurate historically or demographically. Certainly, Ashkenazi Jews used to be the minority, and even as Aliyah to the land of Israel has proven to Jews to the point that it's not really even as much of an issue today. It's proven that this just simply isn't the case, and that there are many different types of Jews all over. Jews look like people in the regions that Jews migrated to and intermarried with, and in some cases migrated to because those were regions where the immigrants could blend in more or less, more so than other areas. So that's one thing, and that actually ties into a developing thesis on the location of the so-called lost tribes and why different tribes migrated and assimilated in different areas. But I digress, as I often do. I've really wanted to address this in a written form, but I just don't really have the time to do it in some polished manner. So I'm just gonna, sort of talk, off the top of my head here. These were some things that occurred to me. Most of you are probably familiar with this book. If you're not, then get it. You probably can even find it at your local library. It's definitely worth checking out. On page 438, there is an article on Black-Jewish relations, and it addresses this notion of like how did things go downhill? How do you have white Jews on every level really participating in the struggle for black liberation in America, and then you sort of have this turning point. Well, there are a lot of different things that the author points out. One thing that he gets into are the formative years of Malcolm X and a marked anti-Jewish perspective that he had, which isn't surprising because he had a very racist and supremacist point of view until going on Hajj. And actually before Hajj, Spike Lee sort of made that into like the watershed, transformation. But he knew something was up before then. That was just really sort of the sealing of the deal, so to speak, because he had been told by Elijah Muhammad, and Elijah Muhammad claimed to have been told by Farad that in Mecca there were only black people. And at the time that Elijah Poole then would have been told this, and even probably the first time that Malcolm heard it, and was perpetuating this, there was African slavery in Saudi Arabia, only recently abolished before Malcolm's trip. So, this was far from the truth, and Malcolm saw all sorts of different so-called races interacting, and really we have to differentiate and distinguish between the early years of Malcolm X and the later years. For instance, this quote doesn't characterize the later post-Hajj Malcolm X. Everybody is wet-eyed over a handful of Jews who brought it on themselves, he said, characterizing the Holocaust. So, was the early Malcolm X somehow, key in disrupting things? I think that would be maybe what the author would like to insinuate, because it makes for a very good Jew versus Muslim dichotomy. But I really think that he was representing a sort of trend in the Black Power movements altogether. In Struggles in the Promised Land Towards a History of Black-Jewish Relations in the United States, which is co-authored by Cornel West, we see on page 214, Black Nationalism, Zionism, and the Left, that really it was it was a trend in Black Power movements, and officially 1967 was the year that Stokely Carmichael and other black leaders adopted this notion, and not simply a phrase of Black Power, but the notion that quote-unquote whites could not and should not be involved in the struggle for black liberation and black power, by which I mean black empowerment and the empowerment of all people. So this sort of trend, I don't think you could say was catalyzed by Malcolm X. I think Malcolm X was just sort of, I don't want to say jumping on the bandwagon, but he was, riding that momentum of sort of, I guess you could say proto-Black Power movements in the United States. But I don't want to make that sound as if there weren't Black Power movements before that, just that there wasn't a sort of coherent ideology, particularly one that had a popular base of support for excluding non-African participation in that struggle. So that's one thing. Coming back here to Jewish literacy, we see him jump ahead to Jesse Jackson and a lot of seriously problematic statements that he made throughout the years, and referring to the Jewish people as a poisonous weed, and all of his media critics being all Jewish. I have another video on the myth of the Jewish control over the media. Big chunks of Hollywood, sure. The media, absolutely not. But I'm not gonna get into that right now. You can just turn on Fox News, Christian-owned Fox News, and see for yourself. But he jumps ahead to that, and again, I think Jackson's not really the ringleader of it. I think he's by that time expressing views that have cropped up, and a divide, a rift that's already occurred. One thing, I believe I think it's in the same book, but I'm not going to look for it right now. One thing that he points out is actually a very controversial and certainly a gray area in terms of this issue, is the notion of quotas, which is, you say quota and everybody has an opinion right away. They think they have a defined opinion, and I guess I would say that normally I think I have a very defined opinion, in that I would say that I favor quotas, and I favor affirmative action. However, quotas were used against Jews in different parts of Europe and so on, to disempower Jews, because so many Jews historically were doctors and very educated, because it was such a culture, and is such a culture, of learning and study, where this is valued above all else, that there were Jews who would tend to, in terms of percentages, dominate different fields, lawyers, doctors, things like that. And quotas became very problematic for the Jewish community, in that Jews were being told, look, you as a Jewish minority can only account for your percentage in America, you know. So let's say at the time that was 2%. That means 2% of doctors could be Jewish. 2% of lawyers could be Jewish. This is absurd, and I think most people would say that that's absurd. I think, you know, most people who are for affirmative action and quotas would say, well, that's not really what we meant. That's not, you know, that wasn't the point. And it's also absurd because it's viewing Jews as this Ashkenazic, coherently defined, biologically, empirically defined race. And that's neither true of the notion of race, nor is it possible to define Jews as such.